All right, we're going to talk about position. So let's make a couple quick divs. Let's do a div dad, and that's our dad class. Now, if you're using VS Code, notice that I'm just using a dot between them. So I can say div dot child dot Grace, because Grace is going to be the name of one of our classes. So it makes two classes on our div child and Grace. Now, if you were to use the pound, so if I did child dot let's say Susie, and then I put pound something, so the ID is something because we use the pound key, which I'm not going to keep right now, but now you know. So div dot, and let's say child dot Pete. So we have 3 children and a parent class, which is called class dad. And these are their children classes. All right. And then if we go in styles, and let's say, actually, let's just put their names in there real quick. So I'm dad. And then inside here, you have Grace. You have Susie. And you have Pete down here. So you save that. Now we have dad, Grace, Susie, and Pete. So if I go into here and I were to say dad, and I said background color, and we're going to say light blue. All right, so they're all inside of the dad class, right? So we know that Grace, Susie, Pete will be blue because they are inside of it unless they have their own color. Now I'm going to add a little bit of padding to this. So let's say 10 pixels. So that way you could see a little differentiation between them when we add other colors. So we're going to say Grace, and Grace has a background color, and we'll say teal. So now you see how there's a difference between them, right? So you see Grace has its own color, and if I can type Susie, and she's going to have a background, not attachment, color of pink. And then we'll have one more for Pete. And Pete's going to say background color blue. All right, so let's make this a max width of, let's say, 70%. So it makes it a little bit shorter than normal. And we're going to put a margin on the left, and that's going to be 20 pixels. That way it just moves away a little bit over to the side so we can kind of see the borders of what's going on. So the first thing it'll take a look at is position static. So position static is going to be the default of position. So if I say left, let's say 20 pixels, you're going to notice nothing happens. And that's because it's already position static. There's no difference. So that part, easy. The next one is going to be position relative. Now, relative is you're changing the position of the element relative to where it would normally be. So if I say position relative now here, the relativity is it would normally be here, but since we have left 20 pixels, it's going to move over from the left side. So this is the left, and it's going to move over 20 pixels. Now, if I were to say negative 20 pixels, it would obviously go the opposite way. So here's the starting point, and it moved 20 pixels to the left. And you could also say right 20 pixels, and it would do the same thing, right? So over here, it would normally be right here, and it's going to move 20 pixels to the left, or from the right side, rather. So it's moving to the left from the right side, because this is your right, and you're moving 20 pixels from that point. And then if I do negative 20 pixels, it's going to do the same thing, 20 pixels to the from, so this is the right border, and it's moving negative, so it's moving to the right from that point that way. All right. I know it's a little confusing because if you say margin left, it's moving margin from the left side. But if you're saying just right, left, it's going to be this is the left, this is the right, and you're moving based on that position. All right? And there's also top and bottom. So if I say top, and I said 20 pixels, we'll just keep it going, 20. And you see how it just overlaps that? So relative is pushing it outside of the normal flow and just putting it wherever you end up. So now it's going to be 20 pixels from the right, negative, and then it's going to be top 20 pixels down. All right. So that is, it can be useful for different things when you want to design. And when you're making like pixel perfect websites, when you have like certain design, it has to have certain divs organized certain ways. That's going to be where you're really going to use position relative. All right. So next is position absolute. Now, absolute can only be done if it has to be a child to a relatively positioned parent element. So this dad would have to be position relative. Now Grace can be absolute. Actually, let's make her relative still. And I'm going to change her left back to 20 pixels. So that's there. And then let's make Susie absolute. So now, Susie, if I say position absolute. Now, notice it already makes things wonky. And that's because Susie is outside of the flow of normal web flow.
So let's take a look at this in another way. Let's add height 200 pics to this. So now you can kind of see that we can make this bigger and move Susie down to the bottom. So we'll say bottom 20 pics. So now you see that Susie's down here. Now keep in mind, when we had this not here, this is commented out, Susie was part of this. So Susie's taking, when you set absolute position, Susie comes out of the normal flow of the document and they ignore her existence, basically. And then she does her own thing, and then the rest of the page do their own thing. And you can put that pretty much anywhere. So if I were to put this position absolute on Pete down here, he would be right on top of her. So I'm going to add right 20 pics. And now he's on the right side. So you can move, with absolute, you can move these things to wherever you want, which is, if you want to have, you know, special styling, you can easily do that with absolute positioning. So let's add a little bit more style. Let's add some height to these Susie, and so let's say she had a height of 50% and a width of 50%. And I'm going to set the bottom. Now, bottom, if you do not have a number and it's just 0, you do not have to put pics. So you have that. Now, if I add the same thing to him, let's say that, and then I move these to 0 as well. Save that. So you can kind of see how you can play around. So if I said, instead of bottom, let's do top right. So you could do, like, you know, different designs with it, kind of move things around wherever you want it. Just keep in mind that it is relative to dad there. And the reason why Susie's off is because of the margin. Remember, we had the margin on there. So if I put left 0, then she would move against the wall. So there is that. And fixed is the next position. And fixed works pretty much like relative, except instead of being relative to whatever container it is in, fixed is relative to the browser. So let's say Pete now was fixed. So Pete goes back to his normal position, right? So if I say fixed and I say left 5 pics, So notice instead of being 5 pix relative to I'm dad, it's relative to the browser. And so everything works identical to relative, except now it's ignoring whatever container it is and just goes directly to the browser. This is actually really useful for using menus, which we're going to do in the next lesson. We're actually going to make our first menu and have it stick to the top. But yeah, that is going to be your fixed, which we're not going to look into much to right now, like I said. So take a look at this. We put in, I commented out the other stuff, and I put in a bunch of definition lists with definitions. They have the titles of a couple of Eminem's albums, and then some of the songs. Now there's some repeats. None of that really matters. So that's all it is. It's just the DLs, there's DTs for the titles, and the actual DDs, which is the song names. And if we look at the styling, we have DT, and it just has a background color with some borders on it. Color. And the most important thing is going to be right here. We have position sticky, and then top -1 pixels. So with those two pieces of information, that's all we really need. And you're going to notice up here, when I scroll, these definition titles are going to become sticky when they hit -1 pixels. So see, notice that it stops all the way. It stays there because it's stuck there. It's being sticky. And then it will move once the next one comes up, and that one becomes sticky, and so on. So if I were to change this to 5 pixels, so if I went to top and I say top 5 pix, now the sticky will happen at 5 pixels. So now there's that little gap because it's sticking at 5 pixels. So you can kind of see the difference between those. So it's actually kind of useful if you're doing lists or something like that. That's sticking farther down. So if you have, like, something like this, or an accordion that you wanted to use, something like that would be pretty useful. You don't actually see them used all that often, but you're aware of it. You can use it if you needed to. So we're going to move on to making our first menu.